Hey everybody, Steve Bunce is a name familiar to you. He has been working in boxing journalism and very much broadcasting, I think, increasingly since 1984. 40 years Steve Bunce has been working in boxing, and he's written a new book, Around the World in 80 Fights, a lifetime's journey to the heart of boxing. And we're going to talk to him. Ronan Mullen here in studio. Hello.
Hi, Joe.
Steve Bunce, just one of those names, I think, synonymous with a sport. So this isn't like a ranking of fights, best fight I have seen type thing. It's just interesting fights I've seen for different reasons, and I'm going to throw them in. So it ranges from the sublime, Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano, all the way to Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury in Riyadh 2023. He's not being po-faced about this selection. It's just like whatever got the juices flowing for different reasons.
Yeah, that's what struck me about it. Precisely as you said there, normally when you see these types of books, they're looking at the upper echelons of the sport and trying to frame it in the best way possible. He's giving a very thorough and representative whistle-stop tour of the sport. And then for people, like it's a nice read for me, like to just kind of jog my memory and see them from his perspective on certain fights. And then I think for like non-boxing fans or in-depth boxing fans rather, it's a nice like tasting menu where you can kind of sample things and see, oh, I must look that up on YouTube and have a look at it. So for that point of view, I think it caters to a lot of different markets.
You sound like you're working for the publisher there.
You think so?
Yeah,
you can get it in all good bookstores and some of the terrible ones as well.
This book caters to lots of different markets.
It does, yeah.
Nobody should not buy this book.
Let's just say markets was a bad word on my part.
I just feel dirty.
I've read too many PR emails, Joe.
Oh my God. Well, listen, I'm going to talk to him and I'll throw certain fights that caught my eye at him. Why don't you give me your Ronan Mullen selection from the Steve Bunce selection?
Yeah, my favourite one of those fights is Naseem Hamed against Kevin Kelly.
You love Naseem.
Yeah, he was my entry point into this sport. I might have mentioned this in the podcast before.
I do.
If you'll indulge me, Joe, it was like, you know when you watched like WWE, WWF back then?
Yeah.
And then it's on the same channels. That was on Sky Sports. And then you stumble across boxing and you just presume as a child that it's the same.
Okay.
But actually, he was just a larger-than-life character in real life. And, you know, there's something nice about people who talk trash, as the Americans like to say, but then get in there and back it up. And he was like an archetype of that. And just to mention on that fight, so
this is Kevin Kelly.
Yeah, to set the scene.
Yeah. What year are we talking?
1997.
1997. A great time.
Yeah, so like, to be fair, these are retroactive memories on my part. I don't remember the fight when it was happening.
What age were you in 97?
5.
So do you remember Princess Diana dying?
It was in around. Like, I don't remember it. Yeah. I don't remember someone coming in and telling me.
Do you remember Tony Blair?
What about him? I remember Tony Blair. That's a different podcast.
It was in 97 he's elected. Don't worry about it. Go on. No, okay.
Him and Noel Gallagher, like, arms around each other.
I think the short answer here is no, you don't. But so Kevin Kelly, 1997, Prince Naseem.
Yeah, so let's see. What's the best way to sum this up? So he was a very much a domestic phenomenon at this point, the UK-centric, and the Americans kind of looked at Naseem Hamed like, oh, he's just one of those domestic attractions. He'll never crack America. But HBO, who are like known not just in sports, but were the prestige market at the time, and they signed him to a multi-fight deal. They saw something in him, and his coming out party in America was against this New York local Kevin Kelly, who's known as a fast puncher, a power puncher. And yeah, it was like, it had all the hallmarks of a banana skin for Hamed, and it did have like ups and downs. Like it's not a long watch if you want to look it up on YouTube.
What happened?
It's just a series of knockdowns, and Hamed got the job done. But I just play a little bit of audio to give people a sense of things here. This was as the fight was agreed, and Naseem Hamed has just fought, and Kevin Kelly's over there to kind of seal the deal, and he calls him up. Hamed calls him up, and they sit beside each other in the ring apron, and this is how the exchange went.
What have you got to say to him now?
I just say he's right in front of me, and I can honestly tell him that I'm going to knock him spark out. I'm going to knock his spark out.
What are you going to say to that, Kevin?
Relax, baby.
You relax.
You gonna get knocked out.
Let me tell you.
In your hometown.
Nah, you had a great performance.
New York.
You're nice and hyped.
Madison
excited,
Square Garden.
But I'm the real deal.
I can't wait to beat you up.
I'm the real deal. I'm looking you in the face, and I'll tell you the face.
Go on. Look
I'm going to smoke your boots.
We'll see.
Because I am the best featherweight in the world.
We will see.
So
I'll take you out like the rest.
Leaping right hand by the Prince. Ooh. And a hard left. And Kelly's down for the third time.
fight is over. He's for real. The Prince is for real.
Punching power, George.
You would have heard there that was them setting it up, and then in the latter part, the ferocious finish from Hamed. He just had for such a small man, blistering power, and absolutely explosive. And he burned brightly, but he burned briefly in the end. Like nowadays he would have been probably manoeuvred in a more dedicated way, and stat padding and that kind of thing. As it turned out, like once he had that setback against Barrera, that was all she wrote. Really, he had one more comeback fight, but that was it.
Okay.
So he's kind of gone into the boxing wilderness a little bit. You wouldn't see him on TV doing analysis all that regularly. So, but yeah, it's definitely, of the fights in this book, I think it's one people should check out.
All right. Okay. Bertie Hearn Finnefall also elected in 97.
Oh yeah.
What a year.
A halcyon days. I do vaguely remember the 1998 World Cup, for what it's worth.
Okay.
I say vaguely.
Purposes of this conversation not worth much at all, but it's good to know. Let's jump in then. Steve Bunce talking about his new book. Steve Bunce, Around the World in 80 Fights, a lifetime's journey to the heart of boxing. Steve, you're very welcome.
Listen, it's a delight and a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We have met before. You will not remember this. Do not worry about that. We have met before. So there's a moment. Let's get it on a bit now. We're getting old. March 2011. Do you know where you were in March 2011?
Yeah, I'm going to say the point in Dublin.
You were in City West, slightly less glamorous.
City West for, Guillermo Rigondeaux.
Yes, against Big Bang Willie Casey.
Big Bang Willie Casey, a fight that they couldn't put in Willie Casey's hometown, and Casey lost really early. And guess what? He lost really early, and they probably did the wisest thing by moving it from his hometown, if I'm not mistaken.
It was quick. It turned out that Rigondeaux guy was good, yeah.
Oh, shoot, he was good, yeah. And I tell you what, do you remember there was a moment when the fight finished? In fact, they should have made the book. I'm a bit disappointed now you've said it. There was a moment when the fight finished when there was a chance that the crowd could have ripped him apart, taking him home in their pockets. Each one of them could have had a little tiny bit of Guillermo Rigondeaux. And there was just a point where he just made a play to be nice to Willie, and then he smiled at the crowd and he won the crowd over. And of course, I'm not saying that was the start of Irish boxing's love affair with Cuban boxing. That had already started with Martinez, the coach. But it certainly solidified that love affair, and it still continues to this day. Do you remember Big Tyson Fury was there with a full head of hair?
I was just going to say, so you were working in commentary in the fight, and I was kind of part of the production staff in the background. And after the fight, you said to myself and the other people working, you said, "By the way, I want you to meet this kid. I think he's going to do something." And this giant with a big head of hair comes over. He said, "Everyone, this is Tyson Fury." And we sort of said, "Hey, Tyson, how you doing?" So I don't know what became of him.
Do you remember? I don't know what became of him either, funny enough. But do you know why he was there? He was there, obviously, he was there because Mick Hennessy, his promoter, was trying to exploit his Irish roots, the whole Team Fury, Clan Fury, as they called it. But he also took part, and I think he got something like about €50. He took part in a program that was being put together by Patsy Barrett, the kid who carried the flag. Francie Barrett, who carried the flag in 1996, the first traveller to carry the flag at the Olympics, the boxer. Well, Francie was doing a thing, tracing his DNA, and they did a DNA test on Tyson Fury. I mean, this is all completely spurious and ridiculous, but it's lovely stuff. So they took a DNA test on Tyson Fury, and they found out that he was related, of course, this is a shock, to some 7-foot giant in Irish history. But the kicker is, and the twist to the story is, and Tyson tells it very well, is that this giant, this heroic warrior from 400 years earlier, was a woman. So he was related to this infamous Irish 6'9" Irish fighting woman with a giant sword. I've never found her. I've never bothered. But maybe she exists. Maybe she doesn't. It's possibly best if she doesn't exist, because then it's a better story.
So the premise of the book is you pick out 80 fights that you've experienced in different ways, or have things to say about in different ways. You have been working in the business now since 1984. Broadcaster, people won't be shocked to hear, obviously. They know you are already, and writer and journalist. You say in the prologue to the book, we'll chat about some of the fights in a moment, but you say in the prologue, when you are up that close, as in ringside, when you're working at the fights, when you're up that close, every punch and moan and cry is loud. You can feel it, you can smell it, and when the blood's flowing, you can touch it. I've had blood on dozens of my shirts, on my face, my writing hand, my notepads over the years. It's evidence of a mad addiction. What is it about boxing for you?
Well, I boxed from the age of 9 till about 16. So I was around boxing people and I was around boxing gyms for an awful long time. And I kind of fell into the writing caper, as I call it. And it really was through a backdoor kind of stuff. I mean, it wasn't a backdoor straight to the top. So there was no like imaginary snakes and ladders. It was a backdoor to running quotes, i.e. at fights, just grabbing and garnishing quotes for a couple of different writers, one of whom I knew and one of whom I was introduced to. So basically I'd go to fights, small fights, these would be like British title fights or maybe a Commonwealth title fight or European title fight, and X, Y or Z would be in the ring and I'd be charged with rushing to the dressing room to try and get a couple of quotes. I had no idea what shorthand was, but I'd come back with a couple of quotes and give it to the guys at ringside because they were filing live copy and they'd give me 25, 15 quid, 18 quid, a tenner, literally that type of stuff. So I came into it through the back door. So the first couple of years were not very glamorous, to be perfectly honest with you. They were just hard, old-fashioned grunt work. And I'm not sure there's a steady replacement for that, to be perfectly honest with you. You've got to be at fights. To cover any sport, you've got to be at the games, you've got to be at the matches, you've got to be at the event, you've got to be at the fights. You can't cover anything unless you've covered it. And I've just got an old-fashioned feeling that you need to cover it at some kind of early, not necessarily grassroots level. I don't want to sound unbelievably cliched, which doesn't mean I live in the past. I think most of the boxers we've got now would beat any of the boxers we've had in the past. But from my point of view, as in my business, writing about boxing, talking about boxing, broadcasting about boxing, I think you need to have started at a fairly low level to appreciate what it's like lying on a bed going to Saudi Arabia for 7 days of being luxuriously driven around the ridiculous city and covering things like Usyk and Fury, because if that isn't ridiculous, then nothing's ridiculous, to be perfectly honest with you.
Do you think the sport's in a good place?
I think it's in a great place. I really do. People are making an awful lot about the Saudi money and what it is and what it isn't doing to boxing. We've had 67 fights so far as part of Riyadh season, and I've got to be honest with you, about 50 of those wouldn't have been made unless the money was there. People have been trying to get fighters together for fights that have fallen out of bed for as long as boxing's been in existence. At the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century, people were trying to get guys out of retirement to fight champions, and it's been that way in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. All that the Saudi money has done, it's a bit like the Las Vegas money and the Atlantic City money in the last 40 years, is it's encouraged reluctant parties to get together. That means trainers that hate each other, promoters that are at each other's throat, and boxers that don't really want to fight the other guy. The money is making them do it. It's a really simple sport, boxing. If you've got the money, you can make anything happen. It's that simple. You'll make the sanctioning bodies fall in love with you, and you bring the fans out. It's a really easy, simple sport. It's a completely cruel sport because the top fighter never has to fight the top fighter unless he or she is encouraged to do so by cash. So whereas in tennis, you have to play the best guy. If you want to win one of the Grand Slams, you've got to play the best guy. Same in golf, same in Formula One, same in football, European Championships, World Championships, same in all sports. Boxing is a unique sporting business that you can be number one and never, ever, ever, ever get near the other number one. Think about this fight recently, Artur Beterbiev, Dmitry Bivol, both unbeaten, both world champions. They were world champions without fighting each other for 6 years and 11 months. Can you imagine any sport in the world where the two best in the world avoid each other for 6 years and 11 months and the crowd still gives a monkeys? That's the staggering thing. It's amazing what we've got away with, if you think about it that way.
No, it is. I mean, I was one of many not so long ago that would look at Pacquiao and Mayweather and say, well, this is just madness. Yeah,
exactly. Pacquiao and Mayweather, they fought, 5-6 years too late. It was a ridiculous event. It generated zillions, and it was entertaining for about 30 seconds, and then it was so obvious that there was something wrong with Pacquiao. Mayweather wasn't bothered about exploiting it. And then we got basically 35 and a half minutes of just not even a glorified sparring session. That sells sparring session shorts. That fight now would have been made, if you'll excuse the time travel, 6 years ago.
Yes, no, I understand the point. And so the kind of the sports washing queasiness that people have, and people do have it, that injection of money, if you're just a boxing fan and you don't care about politics and you just want to watch a good fight on a Saturday night, it's thriving at the moment because of that injection of cash.
Well, listen, I think there's an awful lot of people that do watch it and are still concerned about Saudi Arabia's human rights issues. And there's something I think that's being addressed as we constantly go forward. We can't just ignore it. It's there. It happens. And it's that simple. But I was asked recently on the World Service, which was a bit cheeky. I was asked if when I was in Saudi Arabia 2 weeks ago, I went to an execution. I said, I didn't. I said, but equally, when I go to Texas for Mike Tyson and Jake Paul, I'm also not going to an execution there either. So I tend to avoid, call me old fashioned, but I tend to avoid executions. I'm that kind of person, you know, they're not on my hit list for things to do when I travel.
No, wouldn't be high on my list either.
Exactly.
Let me pick out a few fights from the 80 and that you've jotted about, and you can give me some thoughts. I thought it was very interesting. I mean, Mike Tyson's one of those names that just will forever be. Oh, I'll flick ahead to that chapter and see what Steve has to say about that one. So the one I thought was worth a chat for a moment was Tyson against Lennox Lewis in Memphis back in 2002. Oh. And you write, and you're at so many of these fights, by the way, in the book, of course. The fight was a one-sided massacre.
You all right, Mike? Come on, you have to go, Mike.
So it's being counted as a knockdown because there's no standing 8 count in effect. Tyson's glove must have been seen to touch the canvas. First knockdown of the fight. Now Lewis goes for the knockout. Hurts Tyson with the right hand. Tyson grabbing and holding on.
Almost half the round is left. I don't know if Mike has enough to keep Lennox on.
Lopsided fight, getting more so. Big shots from Lewis. Tyson gets in an uppercut. Shades of Tokyo and the one time he got the Buster Douglas at the end of the 8th round. And that's going to be perhaps the end of the fight. It'll take some courage for Mike to get up from that shot. 7, 8, 9. He's out. Lennox Lewis knocks out Mike Tyson and banishes him from the upper stratosphere of the heavyweight division right now.
So Lewis wins in the 8th round. You say Tyson came to take a beating. And then
yes.
you say something very interesting. It looked to me that it was his mad attempt at being forgiven for all his sins on both sides of the ropes. He never flinched. So he almost went in and took a beating for 8 rounds.
Yeah, I think that that's the impression I got. I don't think when the fight was announced about a year earlier that he was going to arrive and basically hold himself up for sacrifice, public persecution, if you like. I don't think that was the original case, but I think somewhere between the fight being announced and him taking a bite out of Lennox Lewis's leg, which happened about 7 months earlier, and actually getting in that ring, actually the press conference in New York to start the sales pitch. Somewhere along the line, he had a new baby as well, and I think the new baby maybe played a bit of a role. And I just feel that the Mike that got in the ring was a guy, as I say, some kind of. I mean, he was paying penance. It's a really hard feeling, but I got that feeling at ringside. I remember jotting it down. Every single story in the book, by the way, I was at, and I either wrote about it or I spoke on radio or TV about it. That's what I've tried to make it sort of slightly different. So it's not me just writing about Marvin Hagler or Sugar Ray Leonard or Muhammad Ali. I had to be at an event if I ever used the names of the greats, the legends, the icons. But Tyson, that night in that ring, he just put himself up for, a horrible beating, and just took it and was just he was kind of relieved at the end. And there was a calm in his dressing room. And there's a moment when he leaves the dressing room cradling his new son with his face completely distorted. And he's suddenly, for the first time, all of the minders, all of the cheerleaders, all of the sponges, all of the ponces that were in his gang, and it was a big old gang, trust me, they fell silent and he just walked in front of them. So they were behind him. And he may have been more at peace at that moment. Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say he was more at peace at that moment than at any point in his life, because he'd cleared his name in many ways. And in fact, if you look at the kind of love that we have for Mike Tyson now, bearing in mind his previous crimes and misdemeanors. I think it starts that long and brutal and savage and ridiculous and dangerous night.
You say something as well about that fight, that the first round was worth the 10-year wait. It was obviously a proper round, but you say from the second round Tyson was finished. But make no mistake, Lennox Lewis did not want to spare him. He made it last. It was vicious.
Well, the first round was a bit like that first 30 seconds in Mayweather and Pacquiao that we mentioned earlier. It was great. This is what we've waited for 8, 9, 7, 8, 10 years, whatever, take your pick. And then there was nothing there. And Lennox is on record. I know Lennox fairly well. That's not me name dropping. I've worked with Lennox and I've reported on Lennox for a lot of years, and we forged a friendship over the years. And it's not easy to forge a friendship with a boxer. You get to know them, but I'm talking about a friendship. And he openly talks about how he made Tyson pay for everything Tyson had ever said about him and to him in the previous 6, 7, 8 years. And he made it last. He could have finished it at several points, but no, he made him suffer. And Lennox's mother, actually, God bless her soul, she reprimanded Lennox after the fight for doing it because she knew what her son was doing and she didn't like it. That's the truth. Lennox made him suffer, and it made us all feel a bit uneasy. We all got caught up in it, but I'm telling you now, and he's admitted it lots of times since, Lennox intentionally made him suffer. They're boxers. They're vicious people. That's their business.
22 years later, after that night in Memphis, Mike Tyson's going to fight Jake Paul in... I mean, it's going to be an extravaganza. What do you think of both that spectacle and also where Mike Tyson is in his life?
Well, I think Mike might be in a fairly peaceful place, and he's certainly making a lot of money for this fight, for this event. I just hope it's more exhibition than fight, because something happens to you when you get to 45 and 50. And trust me, I passed that number a couple of years ago. And you're naturally slower. You're naturally your recovery points are slow. Everything's different. So if Mike was competing against another 58-year-old, 59-year-old, I'd have all my money. I'd have my house on Mike. But Mike right now is old. He's vulnerable. He's got about 20 seconds to do some damage. And after that, if it's a real fight, after that, it's going to end up being ugly. I'm just hoping that Jake ends up cuffing him somewhere when he's exhausted after 2 minutes and the referee or Mike falls over. We saw recently, a couple of years ago, Evander Holyfield had a fight against a former MMA, UFC guy. And Evander sort of fell over his feet, and it was just horrible to watch. And this could be horrible to watch, unless, of course, they turn it into a pure carnival. Because no one in the arena is going to go, hold on a minute. What do you mean it was fixed? What do you mean it was an exhibition? What did you think it was, you stupid so-and-so? Of course it's that way. So consequently, I'd like to think that they'll wear slightly bigger gloves and they might play around a bit, horse around. We saw Mike Tyson do that a couple of years ago with Roy Jones. If it's vicious and if it's nasty, it will end up being vicious and nasty, and it's going to be a bit sad.
At the other end of the spectrum, on the undercard, obviously you're talking to an Irish audience here.
Yes.
Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano too. Version 1 of that makes your 80 fights at the MSG 2022. You were there for 5 Live. Both made $1 million, 20,000 sellout. First time it had happened at Madison Square Garden. 4 belts each to their name coming into their fight. Like you say, though, the fight, Steve, was better than anybody expected. You say round 5 will live forever in the Garden archives as one of the greatest. Just have a little listen to jog your memory.
Good body punching from Serrano as Katie's in the corner fighting back again. Look at these two go at it.
Serrano is killing the body.
This is what we wanted, and they're delivering.
Katie's taking way more than she's throwing.
This is where that punch output we talked about comes into play. Amanda Serrano averages 67 punches.
Oh, she may have hurt Katie there. Katie was falling forward, but then Katie snaps her banks. Best round of the fight.
Katie's legs are straight. She's not even bending them. Fluid from the nose of Katie Taylor from Amanda Serrano here. She's looking bloody.
Katie Taylor is hurt. Katie Taylor is hurt.
She's holding on for dear life.
Look at Amanda Serrano.
Amanda's hammering away. much damage right now. She's off balance. She has no legs. Standing straight up.
A huge, massive round for Amanda Serrano.
Off balance and she has no legs. It doesn't matter. She had heart. It's that simple. And that moment there, I call it that Rocky moment when she comes off the ropes and she suddenly forces, and I write about it, and she forces Amanda back. And it's just, you hear that Rocky theme in your head, and that shouldn't be happening. That was just, I mean, that whole event was ridiculous. Katie's ring walk, you know, you get emotional just talking about Katie's ring walk that day. If you were there or if you were watching it and you were sucked in and you're listening to her music and you're watching her breathe, and she told me she would do that. We talked about that on 5 Live. I'd written about that, excuse me, in The Independent. And I warned people, she's going to take forever to get to the ring. She's going to suck in the breath. She's going to look at every single face in that arena. And she did. Took her about 6 minutes. And a bad boy band, Brian Peters and Eddie Hearn, they're standing back. And it's just, you can just see what it means to her. Then we get the fight, you know, to fight for the ages, and just moments like that are just unbelievable. Unbelievable. I listening to that there, one thing made me chuckle. In the moment of that absolute ridiculous whirlwind of emotion and fury, one of the commentators gives a fact that Amanda's landed 68 power punches. I mean, that is just the most absurd. That just shows you that commentators between us whisper it. They're not real. They're not right in their head. Because how do you break away from that action to saying Amanda's landed 68 of her power punches? I mean, that is just bollocks. I mean, I just find that beyond belief. Hey, good luck to them. Let them get a living. But that's not real, is it? I mean, it's just not real. What a fight that was. What a night that was. What a fighter she is. What a fighter she is, man.
And so what happens in second edition here before Tyson and Paul?
Same thing. 20 minutes of them going at each other like they do. With Katie maybe being a bit smarter. I think Katie's preparation may have been slightly different. She's been changing the way she prepares for fights since about that time, about the Serrano fight, maybe just a little bit earlier. She's doing less sparring. She's concentrating on being slightly more tactical, which she can be if she wants to be. The problem is Serrano will drag her in. Serrano can never outbox Katie. Katie could outbox Serrano, but it's a big could. In the end, they'll just go for it again. And I can't see it being anything other than a really tight decision. I see Katie nicking it again. But it could be tight. We saw with Chantel Cameron in those 2 fights in Dublin in 2023, 20 rounds that, you know, you couldn't really separate them in very many of those 20 rounds. Did Katie deserve the rematch yet? Did Chantel deserve the first one? Probably. Could it have been the other way around? Hey, it may have been. It could have been. We were just, you know, we were witness then to something extraordinary. And I think we'll get the second installment of Serrano and Katie Taylor, and I think it'll be not dissimilar to the first one. I'll be amazed if one of them wins it comfortably. I'd be staggered.
Floyd Mayweather's an interesting character. So you have him here, the Ricky Hatton fight people will remember in a big way in 07, the McGregor fight in 17. So after that fight in 17 against McGregor, you talk about Mayweather being 40 years of age and he'd never looked older or slower and more desperate at times than at any point in his 21 years as a boxer, and that was being kind. It was his 50th and final win in the ring. I guess the thing you can bring us as well as a little bit behind the scenes. I thought in keeping with just the general build-up to that fight and the whole feel around the thing, you talk about the celebrations afterwards. So Mayweather is straight to a strip club where the entry has gone up from $50 to $500, and he's made $350 million from the fight. And you say, I'm not sure that celebrating and Mayweather go in the same sentence. A man pictured sitting next to $1 million pile of $100 bills and on his own at 4 a.m. in a strip club stretches, in my humble opinion, the notion of celebrating. I would tend to agree with you.
I think it does. You know, he's got all the money. He's got everything he wants. Does he ever look happy? I don't think he ever looks happy. You know, the man can buy 1,000 pairs of 10 grand shoes. I don't think he looks happy. You know, the man brags about having to fly in a separate plane so that the security guards, because he's nervous about things, the security guards are in another plane because they're too heavy. The man, you know, all of the millions and zillions he's got, he has to show us every year. He does the sort of obligatory picture of him holding up a couple of million or in the middle of a couple of $1 million. And, you know, after that fight, you know, there's no fun and games surrounding him. There he is sitting on his own having an apple juice in a lap dancing club with a couple of million, which is just, he's got out of the safe. Think about that. So we're going to let's pose a picture, Floyd. Let's get you there. Let's get the million. Whereas McGregor is at one of those all-night pool parties where the cabanas, that their price increased to about $10,000 from $1,000, dancing and going crazy and making sure that his attorneys and his forensic accountants, as he says, as I say, are going to go in the very next day and start getting the money. And that fight was a lot harder for Floyd than people remember. I can absolutely assure you that fight was a lot harder than people remember. McGregor fought his heart out, absolutely fought his heart out. And Mayweather hadn't prepared and hadn't got himself in the right state of mind. It was a great event. It was a fun event for all the right and all the wrong reasons. And that was, I'm not saying that was first on the team sheet when I started putting together the book, but it may have been first on the international fights team sheet. I can assure you of that.
Well, I think
Mayweather and McGregor.
Yeah, the book is interesting that way, in that you could have been very po-faced about this and just almost gone for the best fights and the sweet science, but actually it's about the sport in all its glory and in all its kind of tawdriness as well. Yeah. On Mayweather, just to ask you a question about him, so like many a night in my 20s was ruined by having to stay up till 5 a.m. with friends, and we've all pulled our cash together because we're watching a Mayweather fight, and 20 minutes in, we've all realised, oh my God, this is another Mayweather exhibition. What a complete waste, and tomorrow's ruined as well. But Ronan, who works in the show, would know boxing is boxing especially well. And I was sort of asking him, like, if the point of boxing is not to get hit and to hit the other guy, Mayweather then is surely in the conversation for, I'm sure he would say, greatest of all time contender in that conversation. So is he? And also, Ronan made the point that when you're judging Mayweather, you have to accept that he moved up weight divisions. So at his own weight, he could knock people out. But when he moved up to fight De La Hoya, of course he's a little bit on the defensive.
Yeah, listen, you know, super feathery was vicious, lightweight, light welter, any weights that there he was moving through, he was vicious and nasty. He adjusted, he wanted to work on a business plan where he controlled everything, and he'd have only a couple of fights a year for 5, 6, 7 years, not squeezing in 3.5 fights a year. Listen, Mayweather is absolutely astounding. You know, he's astounding. He's outstanding. He beat an awful lot of really good fighters, and he beat them handily. Was he in great fights? No. But should that count against him? Well, sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. Is he in any conversation with the top 10 fighters of all time? Yeah, I think he definitely is in that conversation. There's a couple of fighters that perhaps he missed out on the way. Not necessarily the greatest of fighters, because he beat Saul Canelo Alvarez and he picked that moment perfectly before Alvarez was as developed as he became post Mayweather, and he beat an awful lot of really big names. You know, he had a massively hard fight against De La Hoya. Many people on the night believed that De La Hoya could have nicked it, could have taken it on the night. And then there's a massive argument, and the sort of the anti-Mayweather gang say, but how would he have lived with X, Y, and Z? And then they name 10 welterweights from the last 15 years, 25 years. And the answer is they would have been competitive fights. Mayweather might have won one night, but then the other guy might have won the next night. So I think he's in that argument. Personally, I'd like to have seen him finish 1 or 2 fights, because I think he could have, and he didn't do that. But a guy I work with a lot of 5 Live, Mick Costello, you know, he rates him about as high as you possibly can. You've got to rate Mayweather in that argument, but he is at the same time, he's an acquired taste. In my opinion, he's an acquired taste on both sides of the ropes. And so people love him, and that's understandable because of the stats and the facts and the money, which we're constantly reminded of. And then people dislike him for some of his behavior, you know, some of the abuse scandals surrounding him.
Yeah.
and just some of his general behaviour. I also saw him looking at Ricky Hatton's fans in Manchester once, and also in Vegas. And there was a look of longing in his eyes. He would have, I swear to you, Mayweather would have loved to have had that type of fan base, an adoring fan base. I'm convinced of it. I'm convinced of it. The man was held as a human shield by his dad during a drug raid when some drug dealers broke into his dad's house to get some money that his dad owed them. His dad wielded him like a shield in front of them, and he got shot in the leg. The baby falls to the ground. This is not me inventing it. This actually happened. That has to damage a kid, doesn't it? And I don't mean the drop. I mean just the whole stigma of that.
I would think so.
Yeah.
We'll finish with you picking out a fight or two that you want to mention. Just one last one for me. Again, I'm trying to do what the book does, which is capture the full spectrum of the sport. And so a dark night, I suspect, in your life, and you write about it as such, was White Hart Lane in 1991, Michael Watson against Chris Eubank.
Watson still looks groggy.
Watson is really groggy here, Dave. This is going to be absolutely an incredible round.
I think Watson's got to just cup his hands around his head like
he's really in trouble here. Eubanks is doing the wrong thing. What he's got to do here is he's got to tee Watson up, not throw a load of punches because he's too tired for that.
Watson's got to go back to the bench fight and keep his hands up.
The referee's on the verge of stopping it. He stopped it.
Unbelievable.
Oh, no!
Unbelievable.
That is the most incredible end to a world title fight I have ever, I repeat, ever seen in my life.
And I agree.
I'm watching the Four Kings documentary at the moment on Amazon about that era of, that amazing era in British boxing. And again, you're so ensconced in the sport. You had met Michael Watson at Milton Keynes 10 years previous to that fight. You know all these people. It's a chilling moment when Chris Eubank can hardly speak across the ring when he's being interviewed on ITV, because it's becoming very apparent to everybody that Michael Watson is on death's door.
Absolutely. The interview should never have taken place because they could see Michael from their position. And Michael was already on the floor with his head on a doctor's briefcase suitcase. I mean, Michael nearly died so that so many other fighters since then have survived because of the rules and regulations that were introduced, changed, dropped, and then amended and put in place after his. It was an amazing event. It was an amazing fight, and it was just the most dramatic and sickening of ends, and the chaos and the confusion. And I hope, without sounding too far up my own arse, I hope that in the book, you try and capture that kind of real life chase and drive to try and get him saved. There's a story I don't use in the book that I used in another book about when Peter Hamlin, the neurosurgeon, arrives at the hospital that night to perform the surgery, and he can't get in the front door because there's masses of people and media, and he goes around, and there's the woman they call the Queen of St. Bart's, who some people think does exist or doesn't exist, and she opens the door for him. She's a bag lady who sleeps in a stairwell, and she opens the door and lets Peter in. It all gets a bit sort of odd, but the idea is that it's this like dreamlike sequence that somehow the doors open and there's this woman, and up walks Hamlin, and of course an hour later he's saving Michael's life. It's all great stuff. Michael walks marathons now for fun, so to speak. He's a genuine miracle, man. He has no right to be with us. It's that simple. Medical science tells you that he shouldn't be with us, not with the size of the clot and not with the amount of time that elapsed from him collapsing to the moment that that Hamlin got inside his head, removed the bone flap, and basically vacuumed out the extra blood that was causing the pressure.
Yeah,
that was dark days. Those were dark days indeed.
But there is, it's worth teasing out a bit, because this sport that you love has such a darkness. There are two people in the ring trying to inflict damage on each other. Part of the appeal for everybody when they sit down to watch a big time fight is bloodlust. It's in us. And you could ban boxing, and in a perfect world we would ban boxing, but then you would just send it underground, I suspect, because it's in us. And that's the accommodation you have to make when you're sitting ringside doing your job, watching both great athletes do very skillful things, but then at a more base level, you could step back and go, what the hell are we doing? What are we all doing here?
Well, I've been stepping back since that probably September 21st, 1991. I'm wondering what the hell I'm doing there. But as someone might have pointed out, that was 34 years ago or 33 years ago. So I am still there. And you're right. I mean, there's no such thing as a ban. There's already dozens of illegal types of fighting going on around Great Britain, certainly around the world. And I don't mean the MMA caper or the bare knuckle guys that Conor McGregor's involved with. I'm just talking about not just like traveller gypsy squabbles and fights. They're really fair. No one gets hit on the floor. You drop a man, he gets up. You drop him again, he quits, or he doesn't get up. It's as simple as that. In all fairness, the gypsy straighteners or traveller fair straighteners are nothing compared to some of the diabolical crap and dangerous stuff that is happening around the globe and around Great Britain. So that's what happens if you try and ban it. You just make all that illegal stuff even more glamorous and even more accessible. All we can do is try and make it as safe as possible. And right now, the British Boxing Board of Control and also the Irish boxing authorities, we've got a really good track record. We stop guys who shouldn't fight. We enforce scans. We have stringent medicals, and we've got a good record. You're never going to have a perfect record. You can't have a perfect record. The intent is to render the other person unconscious. Don't listen to anybody tell you it's about the art of self-defense. It's about the art of inflicting damage. It's really that simple. And if you don't like that statement, then this book's probably not for you.
No, it's the cold reality. Take it or leave it.
It absolutely is the cold reality, and I think there's an awful lot of cold reality in the book, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah. I'll get on to a choice of yours in a moment. Who, though, is your, and you can interpret the question as favourite or best or most impressive. You've seen so many fighters. Who has a special place in your heart, or why?
Little Naz for British boxers, because I think he's still misunderstood. And globally, Roberto Duran, because it's just staggering what he did, and for the amount of years that he did it. But little Naz, I'm not quite sure. Even now we realise just how exceptional he was, just how brilliant he was, and just how big he would be right now. We talk about how big Ali would be in the social media age. Well, little Naz would be just a millisecond behind him. So little Naz, domestic-wise, for me, but globally, Roberto Duran, because I just find his career is just ridiculous,
And in what way?
And the man knocked out a horse, for God's sake. It's fun.
And in what way is Naz misunderstood, Steve?
Because he still gets abuse for losing close to the end of his career to Marco Antonio Barrera. But, I was really close to Naz, really close to his family, really close to him. And I know how many years Barrera avoided him until Naz had started to lose his weight on the outside of the ropes and had got rid of the great whispering guru from Dublin, Brendan Ingle. He'd got rid of him and he'd gone to another trainer, and that trainer didn't have really access to what he was doing. So Barrera was monitoring it. So Barrera fought, a fraction of the Naz. Had Naz got Barrera 4 years earlier, it would have been a different story. And people were pricing themselves out of fighting Naz. Nobody wanted to risk fighting Naz at his absolute peak. The moment Barrera beat him, every man and dog was stepping forward. So I feel that people need to maybe respect that. And he said some things that upset some people, and he was quite confrontational with the media. He was ahead of his time. He was just fearsome. People talk about guys being big bangers and punchers. Naz would drop people with any punch, either hand, going any which way, with 1 foot on the floor, no feet on the floor, 2 feet on the floor. And these were good fighters. And the press at that time, and it was just about the end of the old guys I'd grown up with and I'd been reading before I even started writing. The average age at ringside then was mid-60s to 70s. There was like half a dozen men who were closer to 70 than they were to 60. And Naz was their kind of last fighter. And they've been around throughout that whole, from the Cooper days in the late 60s, 70s, all the way through the boxers in the 70s and the 80s, all the way through the Bruno period, all the way through Conti and Charlie Magri and Barry McGuigan. And then suddenly they were left at the arse end of their careers with a kid who hated them, a kid who they knew absolutely nothing about. They could not understand this kid. They could not understand how he could put 1,200 people, 1,500 people, 12,000 people inside these arenas. What was the attraction? he's knocking out bums, they said. And then when you actually look at it, he wasn't knocking out bums. He was knocking out guys from Italy who the Ring magazine said was the European Fighter of the Year, who'd never been on the floor. Naz dropped him twice, won all 12 rounds to win the European title. I mean, these are not invented facts. I'm not inventing this. That's how good Naz was. He was a movement. He was a game changer. He changed and altered the boxing business as far as I'm concerned. And I think sometimes he needs a little bit more respect.
So I threw some fights at you that I thumbed through the book and was interested in. Why don't you give us the one you want to talk to the listeners about?
Well, see, the fights, they're not all fights in there, obviously. Some of them are funerals. So the Gary Mason, I like the Gary Mason story in there. I like the Azuma Nelson story in there. I like the Tony Ayala story in there. So to me, it's just it's a whole mixture of the different stories and the different stuff. I mean, a lot of you mentioned earlier on, a lot of the great fights that we've had over the last 40 years that I've been ringside at are not in there. So there's some great Carl Froch fights that aren't in there. There's some great Ricky Hatton, Joe Calzaghe. Joe Calzaghe's not in there.
Yeah, we saw that.
So keep your voice down. I've been avoiding his phone calls for the last 6 weeks because he did me a wob for the cover. Yeah. And all I could get in his message from him saying, "Steve, where the fuck am I? I'm not in your book." So actually, I don't know if I've actually got a favourite from it. I like you mentioned, or you already asked me about Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. I particularly liked that fight, and I liked that event. I liked Francis Ngannou against Tyson Fury because it was just so ridiculous in Saudi Arabia a year ago. Yeah. But I like the Tony Ayala chapter is interesting. The Gary Mason chapter is interesting, and the Azuma Nelson chapter I find with fights as a backdrop. So I haven't really got a favourite.
All right, we won't make you pick your favourite child. That's okay. So to wrap up then, in November we mentioned Tyson versus Jake Paul and Taylor versus Amanda Serrano. The other fight that people have circled into their calendar before 2024 is done. Christmas week, 21st of December, Alexander Usyk against Tyson Fury. We go again. Usyk in May, I think everybody agreed was the deserving winner. So what is the Steve Bunce take on 21st of December?
Manny Stewart, the great trainer from the Kronk Gym who worked with Andy Lee and other fighters and is worked with Lennox Lewis for a long time. He had a great theory that he told me one night in Las Vegas, which sounds like a boast, but it's just the truth, sorry. And he said to me that a smart fighter will always win the rematch if he's lost the first fight. And Tyson Fury, of course, a really smart fighter, but I don't think he's smarter than Alexander Usyk. So I just fancy we might see a little bit of the same. I'm quite concerned now because Tyson Fury, those big fights with Deontay Wilder, the first one of those was 6 years ago. 6 years ago. And the big one, the real dangerous one, the one where, he gets dropped a couple of times and then drops Wilder and stops him. That itself was 4.5 years ago, nearly 5 years ago. Age takes a toll on big men. It really does. And I just got a feeling that Usyk knows how to beat Tyson Fury. He's done it once and he'll concentrate on doing it again. And Tyson, I'm just not quite sure. I mean, I'm probably upsetting an awful lot of people, obviously, with Tyson being related to some 7'4" famous woman from Irish history who had a sword that was 10 foot long. I'm probably upsetting people. In my opinion, I just feel that Usyk might be repeating a little bit of what he did earlier. But again, I think it has to be tight and cagey because Usyk's only going to make it tight and cagey.
The book again is Around the World in 80 Fights by Steve Bunce, who's been covering these events for 40 years and still going strong. And people love your podcast and your voice is just so synonymous with the sport. So it's lovely to have you on and take care and best of luck with it, Steve. Pleasure.
Hey, listen, it's my pleasure. Thanks very much indeed. And thanks for hosting me. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.